This episode of Triton Squadron is brought to you by the Empire. Serve your empire now.
You ever had the feeling of drinking a lukewarm room temperature glass of blue milk while behind you a Toydarian sells an overpriced hunk of junk to someone with weirdly tattooed leku? That's the feeling of driving an Imperial all-terrain armored transport.
Hello there, and welcome to episode 2 of Triton Squadron. My name is Liam, and I'm joining this week as one of your co-hosts. My favorite part of the Star Wars saga is currently tied between the Clone Wars TV show and the Thrawn books. Joining me this episode are Suthanth, who you met last week,
Hello there.
and our resident lightsaber guy, Shane.
General Kenobi.
Thank you for that. So we'd like to start by talking about the lightsaber choreography event that Shane hosted last week. Shane, do you want to talk briefly about how you got into lightsaber choreo and then what we did last week and what we might do in the future?
Yeah, so my journey into lightsaber choreo is kind of, I'll keep it short, but it's a little circuitous. I transferred to UCSD from community college, and when I was in community college, I volunteered at a makerspace. The makerspace, naturally, being a makerspace, had a lot of nerds in it and a lot of people who were really into different franchises, lots of Star Wars fans, Star Trek fans, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, you name it. They were fans of it at the makerspace, and inevitably somebody was doing something like laser cutting Pokemon badges or, doing some sort of fun thing at the makerspace. Well, one day I was building a lightsaber, first lightsaber I ever built. It was made out of PVC pipe for the handle, and then it was basically a flashlight on the inside. Didn't even have a chassis. All the stuff in there was rattling around like no one's business. It was really, really sketch. But one of the fellow volunteers at the makerspace saw me building this lightsaber, and they go, "Hey, so I'm actually in a lightsaber group. We have a monthly meetup that we go to for fun, and there's one happening like this weekend. Do you want to go?" And so I said, well, yeah, sure, why not? I went to that. That was a underground lightsaber fight. Those used to happen once a month in San Diego. They were pretty sweet. They kind of died when COVID hit, but, happens. So I went to one of those, and I met a bunch of people in the choreography group, the Order of Rebel Knights, because they were there to hang out and, vibe, showcase some of their choreography, just kind of take in the scene. Because that used to be what every month happened, is all the lightsaber groups in town would go to this event. They would hang out, they would chat, they would play games, like lightsaber-themed games like Capture the Flag, except the flag is a lightsaber and you can't kill people with it. So I bumped into them. They said, hey, you should come out to practices. I started going to their practices, and it was a lot of fun. Shortly after it, I got into yet another nerd franchise of the Cobra Kai franchise because I saw Karate Kid for the first time in many years, and I decided to take martial arts. Did martial arts for a year and a half while also doing choreography, and I had prior done film and theater work for 16 years, both amateur and professional. Yes, you can look me up on IMDb. No, I do not recommend you watch any of the movies that I was in on IMDb. They are interesting to say the least. I'll plug Ghostline. That was a vibe. But I was a cameo in that one. I wasn't a full lead. But so I took that experience that I had in theater and film, where I'd had a little bit of stage fighting, but more importantly, I'd had a lot of staging work, blocking work. The more training you do in theater, the more you get into the advanced techniques of, okay, you've learned the basics, you learn the stage directions, you learn the very basics of crossing the stage. Here's how you sell power through how a character stands, where a character stands, how you construct your stage, like that, like more theoretical stuff. So I started applying that to lightsabers. Towards the tail end, right before COVID, we started teaching workshops with a martial arts club I had founded at community college. And then after COVID kind of started to dwindle, but it's still around, but it's dwindling. When the Star Wars Club was kind of rehashing out doing in-person events, I said, hey, I've done lightsaber choreo for a while, and it would be cool if we could do an event that just kind of teaches that, because my group hadn't been able to meet due to COVID for quite some time, and people moving on and having lives and starting martial arts schools of their own. And so we did a workshop. It seemed to go pretty well because they asked for another one. And then bippity boppity boo, here we are a year later, still doing lightsaber stuff. So that's kind of how I got circuitously into lightsaber choreography. Started in film and theater, did makerspace stuff. Then I got into martial arts while doing it, and so like it all kind of culminated in that little base of knowledge. I think you also asked about what we did last week and what we're doing in the future. Yeah, so last week we had our first workshop of the year. We spent about an hour on the workshop. We covered one of the building blocks of lightsaber choreo that we used to use in my choreography group. I'm sure I could go into hours long detail about how we constructed choreo. I guess someday, future episode maybe. But we taught one of those building block sets. We call it the sixes, where it's just 6 movements that are based on historical European martial arts, specifically German longsword, the most common HEMA art taught to 15 to 20 people around sunset, and then we learned some flourishes, some spins, and all hung out and played with lightsabers and hit each other with glow sticks for a solid 30 minutes to an hour after the workshop ended. It was a ton of fun. We're hoping in the future that in addition to doing more organized workshops where, say, in the next one might cover like things like the nines, which teaches all of the different strikes and slashes that my school used. We also cover things in the past like how to die convincingly, how to eat yourself convincingly, just get flung. There's a lot of like little things that are covered in the workshops, and then those are like once or twice a quarter. And then on a weekly basis, we're hoping to do just hangouts. And hangouts are a great place where you practice what you learned in a workshop. You start making choreography like that you want to like make into a larger thing. If you ever want to, we've had some folks do fan films. That would be where they would start to build their choreo for that. And just kind of learn more individualized, like specific flourishes and all that don't really make sense to teach in a workshop because it's like a 5-minute tutorial and then go off into the world, it. So yeah, that's kind of where I came from, what we did, and what's coming next. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you for that. And also, if you're hoping to come to any of the future workshops, don't worry if you don't have a lightsaber. Shane has a lot of them.
Too many. Yeah.
Too many.
Too many.
So thank you for that. And now we'd like to move on to our main topic this episode, which is our recap of Andor, which just reached its mid-season. So first of all, what are our general thoughts on the show so far? Do we like it? I hope so. Is there anything in particular that really stands out about this show to you guys?
Personally, I feel like it's been one of the better, if not the best, Star Wars Disney Plus shows. I felt like most of the content we've gotten has like either fallen flat by episode 3 or like around the mid-season. But Andor is like, by having first a longer season, it helps create more mini arcs, which help have its own rise, payoff, and conflict. And I feel like, Andor is probably one of the surprisingly the most important Star Wars show I've been looking forward to in the past few months.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree with it being the best because, especially for me with the pacing, having a couple episodes at first that just really focus on world building instead of like the action and the really cool stuff that like lightsaber fights or whatever that people usually look forward to in Star Wars shows, we're getting a lot more like smaller details that are actually really important to overall in the show. And then they reward us with a 3rd episode with some cool, action scenes for getting through the 2 world building episodes. But I really appreciate how slow it's going because actually one of our members who was going to be on this episode but unfortunately couldn't make it, Anish, he mentioned at some point in the past that it feels like a Star Wars book being turned into a TV show, which I definitely agree with.
Yeah, I agree with everything that was said. I think that Andor is probably one of the most unique Star Wars shows that we've seen in basically every element of it. Like the visuals are all extremely unique. They took one location that we know, but they made it their own spin in that they've shown Coruscant multiple times, but it's the aspects of Coruscant you do not like think about or expect to see. which is with all the other Star Wars media, Coruscant that we've seen so far has been very much like the highest classes of societies, like their casual second vacation home essentially, and a monastery temple and some dude's office, right? That's what we got from Coruscant before, but this is showing all of like the ancillary side things that like exist around the world of like the Senate and the Imperial Senate and all of that, but there's just not time for in other series. And I think that part of what makes Andor special in its pacing and why it's able to do this is it spends so much time building the characters. You feel like you have more of a sense of their day-to-day. And I think it's because Andor so far is taking place in a much shorter time frame than the other shows. It's not like, Daddy Mando taking little Grogu out to find his peeps, and it takes months and months and months, and we got to compress that into like a certain amount of sub 15 episodes, right? In this one, it's like everything we've seen so far, I could easily. They don't give us a true scale of time, but I could very easily see them being like, yeah, this is in the course of 3 weeks. Like, this is just 3 weeks in the life of these characters. Like, I can very easily see that because they're focusing very much on the hour by hour, minute by minute life of these characters, and that's something we don't typically see in a franchise as large as Star Wars, period. So it really stands out, and it really feels like a more dramatic and well-put-together show because of that.
Mm-hmm. And what you said about seeing other parts of Coruscant, I can't remember anything in other Star Wars media where we've seen someone's home on Coruscant, because I think Cyril Karn, his home is on Coruscant, right? Yeah. So, yeah, I don't remember ever seeing someone's home, and that was very surprising to me when he just went to this apartment-looking place, and that's what it is, an apartment. We've never really seen anything like that, and, like, that has to exist in a giant city like Coruscant. I mean, the entire planet's the city, but it was very, very refreshing to see something mundane like that in a Star Wars show, because I really appreciate the mundane things about Star Wars since it's so big and they focus on like the stuff like they focus on in Mandalorian, like the plot and the action and all that.
Yeah, I mean, they literally have an antique store as one of the
Yeah,
locations.
exactly.
Like, that is not something I would not expect, like, in the middle of, like, Revenge of the Sith, Hayden Christensen just busts down a door and is like, all right, Jedi business, I need to round up all these 300-year-old antiques. Like, that, it's a nice, like, side of it where it's like, that, like, stores like these exist. There are shops on Coruscant other than Dexter's Diner. Like, there are other places that people do business. And so you see kind of that side of life where it's like, yeah, we're not necessarily seeing like working class lives, the day-to-day of most people in the Star Wars galaxy. Still a mystery to us when it comes to Coruscant. But these senators have lives, and like it shows all the little pieces of their lives.
Yeah, for sure.
I feel like we can talk about Andor's development. He seems a bit, not exactly one note in Rogue One. We do get some depth, like, I've been in this fight since I was 6 years old, which seems to imply that he's been fighting authority in government and since when the flashbacks that could relate to the Republics and Separatists. And here we're seeing his struggles against the Empire. So yeah, do you guys think it's a retcon, or was it always intentional?
At first, I thought it was a retcon, because when we first start seeing his flashbacks to Kenari, you instantly know who Cassian is. He's Cassa. And when I was first seeing that, I thought, that's weird. He doesn't look like he's 6 years old. He mentioned like being in this fight since he was 6, so I was wondering, like, since I've seen Rogue One and heard that line, I thought that meant like he's been in the rebellion itself since he was 6 years old, which I would put his current age at like 24 or something, like really young, but he's actually older than that. So I think it's interesting that they went with that and like kind of broadened the meaning of that line to being fighting authority, because it seems like the group of kids that he's in, like, they're just kind of living by themselves. They don't really follow any kind of government, and they try to stay away from that kind of thing. And then when that ship like landed near where they were staying, like, they had to go investigate. They didn't really know what it was. They thought it was dangerous and all that. So to me, yeah, it sounds like they're just broadening the definition of when he said he was 6, fighting authority fighting the Republic, staying away from them, staying away from the Separatists and all that. And then now he's fighting the Empire, so he's been he's been in this fight since he was 6.
I think this series is also unique in that it's really playing with the themes of like colonialism in Star Wars, where it like the sense I got from Andor and his tribe on Kenari is that they were like an uncontacted tribe essentially from the larger galaxy. They had their own culture, their own way of life, their own system of living. And when the ship like just falls out of the sky, it completely disrupts their culture and their way of life because suddenly outsiders have come in. And if you're in that scenario, the sudden appearance of the Republic and then the later appearance of the Empire, that's not really any different. It's still armored soldiers in white coming and taking your lands from you and taking your resources, right? It's and shattering your culture. So when he says he was in his fight since 6 years old, it kind of also leans into that, and it leans into the larger theme of the prequels, which was that the Republic wasn't all that different by its death than the Empire. Like, the Republic was the birth of the Empire. The Empire was born out of democracy. That theme in the prequels that tyranny oftentimes is voted into power, right? And tyranny is oftentimes also within a society that itself has gone and done those colonial acts in their past and in their present when they vote that in. And so this is kind of weaving that almost real world parallel into it. So for me, it doesn't feel like a retcon at all. For me, it feels more like they are broadening the perspective of average galactic citizens towards their government, towards the Republic, towards the Empire, and how to your average non-Coruscanti, non-upper class off-worlder, there's not really going to be much of a difference between the Democratic Republic and the tyrannical Empire, because one led directly to the other, and you didn't have contact with one to begin with.
Absolutely. I want to talk about real quick about the language and how they didn't subtitle it, because you mentioned they are like pretty much portrayed as undiscovered, which made me think, like, is that the reason that we as the viewers don't get to understand what they're saying? No one else in universe seems to know who they are. So do they bring that to us in that we don't really get to know who they are either?
I feel like it was an interesting artistic decision. I personally agree with it, and
Yeah, I think that I agree. It's a really interesting choice artistically that I think really pounds into that narrative of like, hey, these folks have no frame of reference when working with the Republic, and the Republic probably took, I mean, we still got more backstory to see, but they probably took just as much, if not more, from these people than the Empire did, because when the Republic stumbled across this planet, they were at war. So they also had wartime needs, right? And so I think that having a culture represented where it's been stated in Andor multiple times that nobody really knows where Kenari is. It's just some, off the beaten track world. It really reflects that like jolting feeling of like these are their own people. Like they have their own way of living, their own worldview and view of the cosmos, and then all of a sudden they're thrust upon a completely different perspective. And so having it so that we can't understand them in a way plays with that idea of them as the other, quote unquote, that would be how the Republic would see them. The Republic would just see them as the other, this unknown group of people that who knows who they are. So in that sense, it's like they placed us into a very specific perspective within the universe by making that decision of not allowing us to know what they're saying.
I want to change tracks now to Cyril Karn, this new, I guess, antagonist character that he was introduced in the first episode, right?
yes, he was.
Yeah, first episode.
That's the overzealous cop, yeah?
Yes,
Yeah.
overzealous cop. I like that description. So what do we think of this guy as a person, as a character, as an antagonist?
I think that as an antagonist, he's clearly, and I know this is probably spicy, but he's clearly taking the same route that one Oscar film from like 20, I think it was like 20 years ago, like Crash, whatever took, where it's like he's a bad guy, but bad guys have lives too. And so it's where you're trying to be multidimensional with your antagonistic characters, where we've seen this guy's like life, his day to day, his really weird looking cereal. Like we've seen all I will never shut up about that cereal, man. I'm not sure how to feel about that.
The Star Wars Instagram did post a recipe if you want to try making it.
I'm gonna have to try it at this point, because that, oh boy, that was like weird Cocoa Puffs. But
That's what I thought, blue Cocoa Puffs.
oh yeah, so like we see this guy's day to day. We see that like I think they're trying to fit into a similar narrative we see. Again, like this is very much reflecting what we see in the narratives on like the modern day. Which is in the modern day, there is a lot of discussion over how we portray law enforcement in media specifically. And he's kind of playing along those same tropes. So it looks like they're trying to kind of weave in things that we are familiar with to kind of drive our understanding of the story, because the story does spend so much time on the day-to-day and takes a long time to get to its conclusion. It looks like it's really trying to give us as much frame of reference as possible for us to like be able to immediately start placing these characters, and so we can focus more on building the characters. We don't have to worry about like figuring out like, oh, what's this dude's deal? It's like, no, he's the multi-dimensional cop character, like that's his backstory. He's got a family, he's trying to like find this person who, did wrong for murder or whatever. Like it's clearly like they're using the same similar stuff that we see in other media, so that they can be like, okay, yeah, this is like his vibe. Let's actually get into him as a character now. You don't have to like build the vibe over time. Just right away you got it.
I'm really interested to see where he moves forward in the latter half of the season. Personally, I feel like he's more of a character foil to Lieutenant Miro, the lady from the ISB, in their dogmatic appreciation and belief that the Empire is right, and that the system's right above all else. And if the system's wrong, then that means our authority or immediate leader is probably wrong, and it's up to us to fix that. And I like to see what's going to drive him later in the season, because right now he's just moping in sadness. His mom's like trying to make him feel better, but who knows? Maybe just seeing his Clone Trooper action figure might help him out.
For sure, yeah. I'm wondering personally if his mom acted the way she did when he came home because she didn't support his decision to get a job in the Empire, or simply because he left home and was far away from her. Like, it wasn't very clear where her personal beliefs lied there. Like, was she just mad at him, or does she personally not support the Empire and not support him being supportive so much of the Empire?
Yeah, also, like, I can't help but notice that this so far, correct me if I'm wrong, we have not seen another parent figure.
I don't
just
think so.
seen the
No, we
mom.
have not.
Yeah.
And so this is a thing where, like, if we're thinking, quote unquote traditional families have two parents, right? Both the parents take part. If this is a family that one kid, one parent, that could also be feeding into that element of law enforcement's a dangerous field. And if you've only got one kid and you only have one parent, you typically don't want your kid doing something dangerous. Like, I come from a household that's like one parent, one kid, and the joke that my mother always cracks to me is that she's like, no, I don't want you going into any other field. You're gonna be a file clerk in like Kansas, like a small town in Kansas that nobody has any beef against. Like, that's what you're gonna be. So it could be an element of that as well that they're trying to portray, where it could be. It seems that he has a really strong relationship with his mom. And so they could try to be, again, multifaceted villain character, trying to build up that, like, hey, maybe his mom also doesn't support his job because he's it. Like, that's all we've seen so far, if I recall. If memory serves, that's all we've seen so far of that family unit. It's just the mom, the kid.
Mm-hmm.
So it could have that element as well, building to his character.
Going back to him being the antagonist, I'm wondering if they're kind of using that as a way to keep us rooting for Andor and the rebellion, because we've already seen like the dubious methods that the rebellion has used to win their battles. Like, they're not all good, like how they're portrayed in episode 4. Like, they're all like good guys ready to go, just get in their little X-wings and go blow up the big bad Death Star.
Yeah, World War II propaganda.
Yeah, exactly. But Andor has already killed people in cold blood. He's already, like, even in this heist thing that in the previous episode, he's already, kind of not even really in the rebellion yet, just here for the money. And then everyone who's like there really believing in the fight, they're like, we've seen for the first time a group of people threatening people, like in holding hostages and doing all these things that like hasn't really been portrayed that much in the Empire. I'm actually thinking of Rebels right now, where like that, like multiple times the characters in that cell would like say things like, we don't do that, we don't take hostages, we don't kill people, we don't do any of these dark things. But like we're seeing now, like you kind of have to do that. Like, this fight is so just difficult. Like, you have to make these decisions, and you have to, like, sacrifice some of your morals. And so I'm just wondering if they're using Cyril Karn and his like devotion to the Empire, which we know is bad. Like, we don't like the Empire. We don't want to root for them. They're a tyrannical, like,
Authoritarian state?
Yes, exactly. Couldn't think of the word. But yes, they're an authoritarian state. We as Americans are not supposed to like that. And I'm just wondering if Cyril Karn is playing the role of making sure we still root for the rebellion.
I believe so. The closest we've gone into like the worst bits of the rebellion is technically Saw Gerrera's partisans, which have been touched on in some of the books. But most of the time it's like there's Saw Gerrera's partisans who take hostages, kill people, and then you have the good guys, the rebellions, Mon Mothma's group of people who they might be forced to kill people, but they aren't people who are looking out to harm people. It's always like, it's a matter of fact that's necessary. But it's interesting to blur the lines a bit, especially since there's been quite a lot of discourse about Mon Mothma being less justifiable in her actions compared to Saw Gerrera, and I found that a bit interesting.
Could you elaborate on that? Because I actually haven't like heard or read much about that opinion on Mon Mothma.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who like to criticize Mon Mothma, mainly because of her inaction really early in the Imperial era. And they like to bring up how, since she eventually became the Chancellor of the New Republic, how her actions ultimately just led to the rise of the First Order, and how she was, in essence, just an ineffective liberal position who just got onto the rebellion train way too late, and how she just ended up repeating the cycles of the past, and how Saw Gerrera, despite being criticized for all his deaths, unnecessary murders, and everything, was justifiable in his desire to tear the Empire down completely and build something new.
Yeah, I think the entire idea of like a murky rebellion, right? And this character who is being used as an antagonist, but clearly is three-dimensional. And then we have the character that, honestly, that was a theory that I also kind of prescribed to, where it's just like ineffective politician, too little, too late. Like, all of that is also playing with one of the most common themes in Star Wars, which is just what happens when you go to war. Like, what is the impact of war on a society and on a people? And in Star Wars, most of the time, it's what is the impact of civil war on a people, when brother turns against brother and sister turns against sister and families are torn apart on the battlefield. And before, in like the prequels and in the Empire era, in the prequels, they made everyone who was fighting an other. They were either a clone or a droid, and you had a few Jedi that were in there on the ground, but in the prequel films, you didn't really get to know them very well. And even in the Clone Wars series, like 90% of the time is on 3 dudes. Like, It's all very much like there's a lot of othering of the people that are doing the combat. And in the original trilogy, the other was the Empire. We just assumed that stormtroopers were evil and inherently wrong. But with this antagonistic character, what we're seeing is like he's not like chasing down Andor because he's like evil and wants to punish the rebellion. He's chasing down Andor because he's a cop and 2 murders happened in his jurisdiction. Like, war is messy. If you think of going back a little bit to the original trilogy as almost like World War II propaganda, people forget that keeping in the Star Wars universe, for every single glorious American film of us coming in and saving the day, there was a Christopher Lee in the background who was like straight up murking Nazis in foreign countries. And a lot of the people on either line of a divide, if you think like, let's think a little bit less ideologically obviously wrong as World War II, because I think we can all agree that World War II had a very obviously not the good guy side. But if we think of more of a complex war, like World War I, a lot of the people who fought and died in that, they fought and died because of allegiance and loyalty to their nation, right? And because of the complex web of their nation with other nations. And because of like conscription and mandatory service in some nations as the wars continued to drag on. It was less a conflict of ideas and more a conflict of nation states, right? In Andor is a character who he hasn't bought into the ideas yet. And honestly, a lot of the other characters we've seen fighting for the rebellion so far in Andor, they don't show crystal clear devotion to the cause yet either. It's very much all of them are murky. They are an insurgent cell embedded into the Empire, like the IRA was in Ireland against the British. You know, like they are a cell that we don't quite know what the ideology is for all of them. And so it's starting to show, like, on one side with the guy investigating a murder and with some of these Imperials that we've seen so far, they're just soldiers. Like, they are just soldiers. The Imperial officer who essentially went AWOL, for a better word, became a traitor, he didn't do it because he didn't necessarily like the Empire. He did it because he hated his boss. Like, they're just soldiers. They are fighting for their nation state of the Empire, right? And we get to see that now with this antagonistic character where he's just doing his job. His job is to investigate crime. And we see it with some of the Imperial officers where their job is to, like, maintain their military state and maintain their chain of command, right? That's why you see some conflict in, like, the ISB, the Imperial Security Bureau, because somebody breaks the chain of command, and then it's a whole kerfuffle. But so this show is playing a lot more with the idea that all the people who are fighting, it's not a right and wrong. It's not a black and white. It's not a clear idea versus idea type issue. For those who are on the ground day to day, who aren't the senators, who aren't the emperor, who aren't the people, the Jedi Knights who had genocide committed upon them, for those people, they're either fighting for their country or they're fighting for money so far, is what we've seen. Like, there's no black and white. I think it's kind of refreshing to see that. It does build up really well to the idea of Rogue One, which the idea is we've seen the rebellion, as you mentioned, as this heroic force, but every heroic force has a darker underbelly that has to help it get there.
All right, so moving on. What do you guys think season one's going to end like? Personally, I just want them to return to Ferrix, bring back Bix, and somehow tie in Cyril. I don't want him to join the rebellion. I feel like he's just going to somehow redeem himself to the Empire and finally understand that maybe the Empire isn't right.
Yes, and I would appreciate that too if they didn't have him join the rebellion, because we've seen that happen with multiple characters who were previously in the Empire, like Bodhi Rook, Agent Callus. They both defected from the Empire and joined the rebellion. So it would be refreshing to see someone like consider their views and then go back to where they were. That would be very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to add on to that list of technically you could even consider one of our OG main characters, Han Solo. He defected from the Empire. Also, Biggs Darklighter was an Imperial Academy like cadet who went over to. So there's. I agree in that I don't particularly want to see this character go over to the rebellion, because that seems to be a trope that we've done a little bit too hard in Star Wars of Empire bad, I go join good guy. I honestly, for season 1, I would kind of like to see almost that like this character stays with the Empire, but just we see them as like they wrap up the case and they move on to the next one. Like their whole thing is like they did their job. They are redeemed to their employer. They go back to doing their job. Because it really sells that narrative of, war is messy, and there are a lot of people in war that I know it's a cop out in a lot of cases. In some cases, especially when like war crimes are involved, but in things like what are happening in Andor, you could reasonably say like that character, he could just go back to saying, I'm just doing my job, man. Like I am just investigating crime. That's what I do for a living. So I think that having that understanding and being able to have like almost, I would love to see almost an understanding between him and Andor of like, hey, we're both just working our 9 to 5. This is just our job. Like you're on the opposite side of the war, but this is just our job. Because if you think about like modern day wars and like modern day operatives on the seedier sides of war, a lot of them know each other by name, because for them it's like we're on opposite sides of this war. You're over there doing your job, I'm over here doing my job. Both of our job is to undermine each other, but ultimately it's a job. Like I would like to see by the end of season 1, I would love to see just that kind of understanding where it builds that gray area where it's two folks who are they're just doing their jobs, and it would fit well into Rogue One, because eventually you could make the narrative be that doing the job is what broke Andor. Just the job sucks. Like it's a rough one, and that's what broke him and the other operatives to go fight on Scarif. It's just they did their job, they did it really well, but it's a really hard job. So I would like to see that kind of be where it goes if possible.
Absolutely. And I think we're going to wrap our episode up there. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Shane, for joining us. And don't forget, if you would like to be a guest on this podcast, we do have a form in the Discord. You can submit.
You can submit a response about what topic you want to talk about. It doesn't have to, and how much you want to talk about it. It doesn't have to be like our usual 30 to 40 minute episode. We could just bring you on for 15 and talk about Andor.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that'll be all. Trident Squadron, signing out.